The rain fell that evening like tears from heaven, cold and unforgiving, soaking through the thin jacket of a young girl who stood at the iron gates of the grandest mansion she had ever seen. Her name was Maya, and she was 17 years old, with eyes that had seen too much sorrow for someone so young. She clutched a worn envelope in her trembling hands, an address scribbled in fading ink, the last thing her grandmother had given her before closing her eyes forever. The mansion before her rose like a mountain of stone and glass, its windows glowing with warmth that felt a universe away from the cold street where she stood. Maya had traveled 3 days by bus, sleeping in stations, eating nothing but stale bread, following a thread of mystery that began with a single photograph hidden in her grandmother's Bible. A photograph of a woman who looked just like her. A woman she had never known. Her mother. The security guard approached with suspicious eyes, his hand already reaching for his radio. Who was this girl, soaked and trembling, standing at the gates of Nathaniel Westbrook's estate? Nathaniel Westbrook, the billionaire, whose name appeared in headlines, whose empire touched every corner of the city, whose reputation was built on steel and silence. The guard demanded she leave immediately. This was private property. She did not belong here. But Maya stood her ground, her voice barely a whisper against the storm, asking only one question that would shatter the walls of that grand house and expose secrets buried for 17 years. She asked to see the owner. She said she had something he needed to see. Something about a woman named Claire. And when she spoke that name, the guard's expression changed, just for a moment. A flicker of recognition that told Maya she had come to the right place. Inside that mansion, beyond the marble floors and crystal chandeliers, beyond the paintings worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, beyond the illusion of perfect success, Nathaniel Westbrook sat in his study, a man who had everything and nothing at all. He was 53 years old, his hair silver at the temples, his face carved with the lines of a man who had fought his way from nothing to everything. He had built an empire, commanded respect, earned his fortune through brilliance and ruthlessness in equal measure. But there was a shadow in his eyes, a weight he carried that no amount of wealth could lift. A past he had tried to bury, but could never escape. A love he had lost. A choice he had made that haunted every silent moment of his life. When his assistant entered and told him about the girl at the gate, he almost dismissed her. Almost sent her away like all the others who came seeking money, seeking favors, seeking a piece of his fortune. But then the assistant mentioned the name. Claire.D. And Nathaniel Westbrook, the man who never showed emotion, who never allowed his hands to tremble, froze. His heart, which had been numb for so many years, began to beat with a pain he thought had died long ago. He stood slowly, his voice barely audible, telling them to bring the girl inside, to bring her to him. Because Claire was the name of the only woman he had ever loved. The woman he had lost 17 years ago. The woman whose memory lived in the locked room at the end of the East Wing, a shrine he visited every night, surrounded by photographs and letters, and the ghost of what could have been. Maya was led through. Always that felt endless, her shoes leaving wet marks on floors so polished she could see her reflection. She passed rooms larger than her entire apartment, filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in museums. She had never seen such wealth, such excess, and it made her think of the apartment where she grew up, where the walls were thin and the heat barely worked in winter, where her grandmother raised her on love and prayers and stories about a mother who had disappeared before. Maya could even form memories of her face. Her grandmother had told her that her mother was beautiful, that she had a smile that could light up the darkest room, that she had dreams of becoming a teacher, of making a difference in the world, lifting children out of the same poverty she knew. But those dreams had ended abruptly, and no one would speak of what happened. No one would tell Maya the truth. Until 3 weeks ago, when her grandmother, on her deathbed, had pressed that envelope into Maya's hands and whispered with her last breath that it was time Maya knew. Time she learned who her father was. Time she understood why they had lived the way they did. The door to the study opened, and Maya found herself face to face with Nathaniel Westbrook. He stood by the window, his back to her initially, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he turned, his eyes met hers, and something broke inside him. Because looking at Maya was like looking at a ghost. She had Claire's eyes. Those same warm brown eyes that had once looked at him with love and trust. She had Claire's gentle features, her high cheekbones, her determined chin, the way her lips pressed together when she was nervous. But there was something else too. Something in the curve of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the intensity of her gaze, that mirrored his own reflection. This girl was a living bridge between his past and present, a truth made flesh, standing in his sanctum of carefully constructed denial. Maya pulled out the photograph with shaking hands. It was old, faded at the edges, creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. It showed a young woman standing in front of this very mansion, smiling at the camera with hope shining in her eyes. The same mansion. The same iron gates. The same stone pillars. The woman in the photograph wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back, her expression full of innocence and belief in a future that would never come. And beside her, barely visible in the corner of the frame, was a young man's hand, reaching out to hold hers. Maya's voice cracked as she spoke, asking the question that had brought her through rain and doubt, and 3 days of traveling with nothing but this address and a need for answers. Why is my mother's photo in your mansion? Why did she stand where I stood today? Who was she to you? And who am I? And the silence that followed was so heavy it could have crushed them both. Nathaniel moved to his desk with slow, deliberate steps, like a man walking toward his own judgment day. His hands trembled as he opened a drawer and pulled out a key, old and brass, tarnished with time and the weight of 17 years of regret. He told Maya to follow him, his voice, barely above a whisper, and led her down the hallway to the locked room, the room no servant was allowed to enter, the room that held his greatest treasure and his deepest shame. He unlocked the door, and when it swung open, Maya gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The room was a museum of memory, a shrine to a love that never died but was buried alive. Photographs covered every wall, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Claire laughing at some joke only she and the photographer understood. Claire reading in a park, sunlight filtering through the trees. Claire with her arms wrapped around a younger version of the man who stood beside Maya now. Both of them looking at the camera with the kind of happiness that believes it will last forever. There were letters in frames, love letters written in careful handwriting, dried flowers preserved in glass cases, a painting of Claire that dominated one wall, her image captured in oils with such love and attention that it seemed alive, as if she might step out of the canvas at any moment. Nathaniel stood in the center of that room, and for the first time in 17 years, he allowed himself to speak the truth out loud to another person. He told Maya that he had loved her mother with every fiber of his being. That they had met when he was 26, still building his company, still fighting his way up from the poverty that had defined his entire childhood and early adult years. Claire had been a student, working nights to pay for her education, serving coffee at the diner on 5th Street, where he would spend hours working on business plans because he could not afford an office. She had believed in him when no one else did. She had seen past his worn clothes and empty wallet and second-hand laptop to the man he could become, the dreams he carried. They fell in love in that diner, over coffee and conversation that lasted until dawn, building dreams together, planning a future where they would both escape the circumstances of their birth and create something beautiful. He promised her everything. A life free from worry, a future bright with possibility, a love that would last forever, a home where she could finally rest and pursue her dreams of teaching, without working 3 jobs to survive. He told her that once his company took off, once he secured the funding he needed, they would get married, buy a small house, start the life they had planned in those long conversations. Claire believed him. She wore his promise like a shield against the hardness of her daily life. She waited tables and cleaned offices and attended classes on 4 hours of sleep, but she did it with hope because she believed in their future. But Nathaniel's family had other plans. His uncle, the man who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12, the man who controlled the trust fund that would launch his business, issued an ultimatum that tore Nathaniel's world apart. Marry the daughter of their business partner, secure the merger that would make them all wealthy beyond measure, create the foundation for an empire that would last generations, or lose everything. Walk away with nothing. No funding, no company, no future, except the poverty he had spent his entire life trying to escape. Nathaniel faced a choice that would define his life and destroy 2 others. Love or ambition? Claire or empire? The woman who saw him when he was nothing, or the family approval he had spent years seeking. And he told Maya, his voice breaking with anguish that had aged inside him like wine turning to vinegar, that he made the wrong choice. He told himself he would come back for Claire, that he would build his fortune quickly, and then be free to love her without anyone's permission, without risking his entire future. He convinced himself that a few years of sacrifice would buy them a lifetime of happiness, that Claire would understand, that she would wait because their love was strong enough to survive anything. So he married the other woman, Victoria Hensworth, in a cold ceremony that felt like a funeral for his soul. And he told Claire, in a conversation that still played in his nightmares, that their love had been a beautiful mistake, that she needed to move on, that he could not risk his future for her, that he was sorry, but this was how life worked. Claire disappeared after that conversation. She stopped coming to the places they used to meet. She did not answer his letters, the ones he sent in secret after his wedding, begging her to wait, to understand, to forgive him, promising that he would find a way back to her. Nathaniel threw himself into his work with furious determination, building his empire with a desperation that looked like ambition but was really just a man trying to outrun his guilt. His marriage was loveless, a business arrangement that produced no children and no warmth, and ended in an expensive divorce after 5 years. He had his wealth by then, his power, his mansion, his name in the newspapers. But every night, he would come to this room, the room he built specifically to preserve her memory, and he would wonder what happened to Claire, where she had gone, if she had found someone else, if she ever thought of him, if she was happy. He hired investigators twice to find her, but called them off both times because he was afraid. Afraid of what he might discover. Afraid that she had moved on and his suffering was pointless. Afraid that she had not moved on and he would have to face what his choice had done to her. And now, standing before Maya in this room filled with ghosts and regrets, he learned the truth that shattered him completely. Claire had been pregnant when he left her. She had carried his child, his daughter, through those lonely months, working until the day she went into labor because she had no one to support her. She had raised Maya alone, working multiple jobs to survive, never asking him for anything, never revealing his name, never seeking the child support that was legally hers, never showing up at his office or his mansion, demanding what he owed. She had given Maya every ounce of love she possessed, but the strain of single motherhood, the endless work, the sleepless nights, The stress of providing for a child with no support and no rest and no relief had destroyed her health slowly and mercilessly. Claire had died when Maya was 3 years old, her heart giving out. From exhaustion and stress and a lifetime of carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear. The doctors said it was cardiac arrest. Maya's grandmother said it was a broken heart that finally stopped beating. Maya had been raised by Claire's mother in that small apartment where love was abundant, but everything else was scarce. Nathaniel fell to his knees in that room, surrounded by photographs of the woman he destroyed with his cowardice. Maya watched him, this powerful man, reduced to nothing, tears streaming down his face, his hands covering his eyes as sobs racked his body with a violence that shook his shoulders. He kept saying he was sorry, over and over. The words a useless offering against 17 years of absence. He had believed he was choosing wisely, choosing the responsible path, the practical path, the path his uncle and society and common sense all told him was right. But he had chosen wrong. He had sacrificed the only real thing in his life for things that ultimately meant nothing. His wealth felt like ashes now, his success a monument to failure, his mansion a mausoleum for the living. Maya stood there, her own tears falling, feeling a storm of emotions she could not name or separate. Anger at this man who abandoned her mother when she needed him most. Grief for the father she never knew, for the childhood she should have had. Confusion at finding herself in this palace of memories, face to face with a past she had only imagined in the lonely moments of her life. She thought of her grandmother, who had died in that small apartment just 3 weeks ago, who had spent her final years cleaning other people's houses to help raise her granddaughter, whose hands were worn rough from decades of hard labor. She thought of her mother, Claire, who had worked herself to death rather than reach out to the man who had promised her everything and given her nothing, who had chosen pride and independence over asking for help from someone who betrayed her. The unfairness of it all threatened to overwhelm Maya. Why had her mother and grandmother suffered in poverty while this man lived in luxury? Why had they struggled for bread while he dined on abundance? Why had they died young while he lived in comfort? How could the world be so cruel and so unjust? But then Nathaniel looked up at her with eyes red from crying, and Maya saw something she had not expected. She saw genuine remorse. Not the hollow apology of a man trying to ease his conscience or buy forgiveness with money. Not the performative guilt of someone who wants to look good. But the deep, soul-crushing regret of someone who finally understood what his choices had cost, who had lived with that knowledge for 17 years, who had built a shrine to his guilt, and visited it every night like a penitent visiting a grave. He told her that he would give anything to change the past, to go back and choose differently, to have the courage at 26 that he lacked, to choose love over security, to trust that they would find a way together. But time moves in only one direction, and the past cannot be rewritten, only regretted and mourned. He told Maya that he had no right to ask for her forgiveness, that he deserved her hatred, that he understood if she wanted nothing from him but the truth she came seeking, and then never wanted to see him again. But then he said something that surprised her. He told her that she looked exactly like Claire, not just in appearance but in the strength he saw in her eyes, in the set of her jaw, in the way she stood despite being cold and wet and facing a stranger who might be dangerous. The fact that Maya had come here alone, seeking answers, tracking down a truth that had been hidden from her entire life, showed the same courage her mother had possessed. The courage to face hard truths. The courage to demand answers. The courage that he himself had failed to find when it mattered most. Nathaniel stood slowly, his legs unsteady, and walked to a desk in the corner of the room. He opened another drawer and pulled out documents, papers that had been prepared years ago in a hope that never materialized. They were adoption papers never filed, intended for a child he had believed might exist somewhere in the world. A child of Claire's he had hoped to find, to help, to somehow make amends to. But he never had the courage to search seriously, afraid of what he might discover, afraid that Claire had moved on and built a happy life without him, and his presence would only disrupt that happiness. Afraid that she had not moved on and seeing her pain would destroy him. Now he knew the truth. Claire never moved on. She carried his child in secret, raised their daughter with all the love she had, and died young, worn down by the weight of loving someone who had chosen something else. He told Maya that these papers were worthless now, relics of a hope that came too late, dreams that should have been dull, acted on years ago. But he made her a different offer, not to erase the past because that was impossible, not to replace the grandmother who raised her with love because no one could do that, but to give her the future her mother never had. The future that should have been hers by right of birth. He offered to pay for her education, any school she wanted to attend, any degree she wanted to pursue, any dream she wanted to chase. He offered her security, not as a payment for his guilt, not as a transaction to buy her forgiveness, but as the right she should have had from the moment she was born. The support her mother should have received. The childhood she should have lived. And if she would allow him, if she could find it in her heart, to give him a chance he did not deserve. He wanted to try to be the father he should have been 17 years ago. Not to buy her love or erase his mistakes, but simply to do what was right, even though it was far too late. Maya stood in silence, processing everything, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Part of her wanted to run from this place, to reject everything this man offered, to hold on to the anger that felt safer than vulnerability, to protect herself from being hurt by someone who had already proven he could not be trusted. But another part of her, the part that remembered her grandmother's final words, the part that had traveled 3 days to find this truth, understood something deeper. Her grandmother had not given her this address out of revenge or bitterness. She had given it out of love, wanting Maya to have opportunities that she and Claire never had, wanting her granddaughter to escape the cycle of poverty that had consumed 2 generations. And perhaps, in some way Maya could not yet fully comprehend, there was healing to be found in this broken place, in this meeting between a father who failed catastrophically and a daughter who survived despite his failure. She looked at the photographs on the wall again, really seeing them this time, seeing her mother young and full of life and hope, seeing the love between her and this man who stood before her now broken and aged. Maya asked him why he kept this room locked, why he preserved these memories so carefully if he had truly moved on with his life. And Nathaniel told her that he never moved on, not for a single day. Every night for 17 years, he had come to this room after the servants left, after the business associates departed, after the silence of the mansion became unbearable. He had sat here and spoken to Claire's photograph, telling her about his day, asking her forgiveness, promising that if he ever found their child he would make things right, begging her spirit for a sign that she did not hate him. This room was his prison and his sanctuary, the place where he kept his heart, because he could not bear to let it exist anywhere else, because the business world demanded coldness, and this was the only place he could be human. Maya made a decision in that moment. Not forgiveness, because forgiveness takes time and cannot be rushed or forced. Not complete acceptance of everything he offered, because she needed to process what all of this meant and who she wanted to be in relation to this man. But she decided to listen, to stay, to let him tell her about her mother from his perspective, to learn about the woman Claire had been before poverty and single motherhood consumed her, to hear stories her grandmother never knew, moments that existed only in this man's memory and in this room. And so they sat together, father and daughter meeting for the first time in a meeting that was 17 years too late, surrounded by images of the fair woman who connected them. And Nathaniel began to speak about Claire in a way that brought her back to life. He told Maya how Claire used to hum while she worked, old songs her own mother had taught her, melodies that made people smile without knowing why. How she loved reading, would lose herself in books during her breaks, dreaming of becoming a teacher who would inspire children the way her favorite teachers had inspired her. How she had a laugh that made everyone around her smile, a genuine joy that was rare in someone who had known so much hardship. How she would save her tips to buy books for the children in her neighborhood, reading to them in the park on Sunday afternoons, planting seeds of hope in young minds. How she believed that education was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty. That knowledge was the one thing no one could take from you. That learning opened doors that money alone could not. Nathaniel told Maya that her mother was the best person he had ever known. That she had taught him what it meant to be good, to be kind, to value people over profit. And he admitted with shame thick in his voice that when he walked away from her, he did not just lose love. He lost his compass. He lost himself. As the night deepened and the rain continued to fall outside, Maya asked harder questions. Questions that cut to the bone. She asked why he never searched for her mother seriously. Why he accepted her silence so easily. Why he did not fight for her. Why he let fear rule his choices. And Nathaniel had no good answers. Only the truth of his cowardice. He had told himself that Claire was better off without him, that she deserved someone who would choose her first, that his presence in her life would only complicate things. But the real truth, the truth he had hidden even from himself for years, was that he was afraid. Afraid of facing what he had done. Afraid of seeing disappointment and pain in her eyes. Afraid of choosing her again and proving his family right. That love makes you weak. That emotion is a luxury the ambitious cannot afford. Afraid of failure. Afraid of judgment. Afraid of being human. So he hid in his work, in his growing empire, building walls of wealth around the hole in his heart where love used to live. Maya listened to all of this, and something inside her began to shift and evolve. She realized that this man before her was not a villain from a simple story, not some heartless tycoon who felt nothing and cared for no. He was a human being who made a terrible choice at 26 years old and spent the rest of his life paying for it in ways invisible to the world. That did not erase what her mother suffered. That did not bring back her grandmother or give Maya the childhood she deserved. But it did add complexity to a story she had thought was simple. Life, Maya was learning in real time, rarely offered clear heroes and villains. Most often it gave flawed people making choices they thought were right, or necessary or practical, only to discover too late that they were wrong. And living with those wrong choices, carrying that weight year after year, was its own kind of suffering. As dawn approached, painting the sky outside with shades of rose and gold, washing away the rain, Nathaniel asked Maya what she wanted to do, where she wanted to go from here. And Maya, exhausted and emotionally drained but also strangely at peace, told him honestly that she did not know yet. She needed time to think, to process, to grieve the father she never had, and the mother who was stolen from her too soon by circumstances that should never have existed. But she agreed to stay in the city for a while, to let him show her the places where he and Claire fell in love, to walk the streets they walked, to sit in the diner where they dreamed together, to visit her mother's grave together, a grave he confessed he had located years ago, but never had the courage to visit. To begin, slowly and carefully, building something new from the ruins of the past. This story teaches us that choices have consequences that ripple through time, affecting not just ourselves but everyone connected to us in ways we cannot predict or control. It reminds us that cowardice, disguised as practicality, can destroy lives, that choosing security over love often leads to losing both. But it also shows us that redemption is possible, that people can change, that healing can happen even from the deepest wounds if both parties are willing to do the painful work of forgiveness and connection. Maya could have rejected Nathaniel completely, could have taken her anger and left, could have held onto resentment as a shield. Nathaniel could have offered money without presence, could have written checks without changing his life. But both chose the harder path. The path that required vulnerability, honest conversation, sitting with discomfort, facing painful truths. Never judge a person by their address or appearance, because you have no idea what story brought them to your door. The girl standing at the gate in the rain might be carrying a truth that will change your life. The parent you resent might be carrying regret that weighs heavier than any burden you know. Pain does not discriminate. Love can exist in the smallest apartment and be absent from the grandest mansion. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the choices you have made or the bridges you need to build, then honor that feeling. Like this video if you believe in second chances, but also in accountability. Subscribe for more stories that explore what it means to be human. Share it with someone who needs to hear that forgiveness is not weakness but strength, that healing takes time, and that sometimes the people we think we can never forgive turn out to be the ones who teach us the most about grace. Because every story hides a truth, and every truth deserves to be heard.